If you look at a map of Chicago today, you might realize that it looks like this. But what if I told you that it used to look like this? If you've ever played Flight Simulator, you will recognize this airport because it used to be the default spawning point for flights. You might have took off from here, flown a little bit, only to crash somewhere in Chicago because you were trying to do barrel rolls between skyscrapers. This was all true until Flight Simulator X, when the airfield was eventually removed. It was removed not because of a mistake from the developers, but also because it was removed in real life, in a very movie-like manner, although it seems like it could be added again in an upcoming Flight Simulator update. Hold on to your controls, my captains, because today we are going to dive deep in the bizarre story of this very unique airport. Northerly Island is not a natural formation. In fact, it was built in a 1909 plan of Chicago by Daniel Burnham and Edward H. Bennett. It was a document that recommended a series of projects to improve and modernize the city. The improvements included a better lakefront, bigger and better roads, more railway terminals, etc., etc. One of the improvements proposed was the island, which was originally intended to be used as a park, and to be populated by trees and grass for the public enjoyment of all. Grant Park, a park close to where Northerly Island had to be built, was where the first flight from Chicago took off in 1910, and by 1918, regular airmail operations began there. However, Grant Park soon became unsuitable for the city's growing aviation needs. Burnham died in 1912, and by 1916, Bennett figured out that the lakefront location would be most suitable for an airport serving the central business district. In 1920, Chicagoans approved a referendum concerning the construction of the peninsula, and in 1922, the construction finally began. The Great Depression and World War II, though, slowed down the progress, but the island was completed in 1933 nevertheless, and that same year, it was used for the Century of Progress International Exposition, which was one of the biggest expositions about science and technology at the time. Immediately after World War II, in 1946, the airport's construction began, and it was completed only 2 years later, in 1948. The airport was named after Merrill C. Meigs, a newspaper publisher. He was inspired by Lindbergh's New York to Paris flight, and became a booster of Chicago as a world center for aviation. He also, by the way, gave flying lessons to President Truman. So, isn't that fun? It's pretty crazy. This was all until in 1994, the mayor, Richard M. Daley, announced his plan to close the airport and build a park in its place, which, by the way, was the original intended use, so you can't even blame him too much. But, nonetheless, he did this in a very particular manner, let's say. He announced the closure of the airport, and he managed to close the airport from October 1996 to February 1997, until pressure from higher up persuaded him to reopen the airport for at least 5 more years. In 2003, though, once there were no more binding obligations with anyone, the mayor, Richard Daley, decided to engage in a Mission Impossible-like operation. Since every time he announced the demolition of the airfield, someone would get in the way, he decided not to announce anything this time and perform the mission in secret. A demolition team was hired, and the night of the 3rd of March 2003, they entered the airport with vehicles and machinery that would render the runway unusable. The operation was so secret that workers were asked to leave their cell phones behind, and fake live webcams were set up online streaming recorded video of the past night of the airport so that nobody would notice anything. After a long night of undercover work, this was the condition of the airfield the next day. Big X's had been dug on the runway surface to the point of making it unusable. This, by the way, stranded a few aircraft that were parked at the airfield overnight. But thankfully, the owners of these aircraft were able to fly away using the taxiway, which had actually been authorized to be used as a runway temporarily. So after that, the mayor was obviously sued, but since the city of Chicago had paid back its federal aviation grants, the court ruled that Chicago was allowed to close this field as it was entirely their property at that point. The city only had to pay $33,000 back as a fine, which for a city is really like pennies worth. And that was because it was the maximum amount legally allowed at the time to be fined. But after that, it also paid back $1 million, which were funds that were actually supposed to be used to improve the airport, but which were really used to bulldoze the airport instead. So, fair enough. Now, the airfield seems to be just a distant memory, but still a memory that the new Microsoft Flight Simulator update seems like it might bring back. With the history that a place like this has, I think that it could be a great thing to see added to the 40th anniversary of Flight Simulator. So we'll just have to wait and see. What do you think? Could this be a good addition to the Flight Simulator? Could this be a good thing to bring back in real life as well? Or do you think that the part construction was actually a better option? Let me know in the comment section below, and see you in the next video.